Good evening and welcome to CHQ Assembly. My name is Michael Hill and I am proud to serve as president of Chautauqua Institution. I want to thank you for joining tonight's program, The Tehran Children, Iran's Unexpected Connection to the Holocaust, a special partnership between Chautauqua Institution and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. In 2018, we were honored to welcome Museum Director Sarah Bloomfield to Chautauqua's grounds for a week of programming focused on the forgotten, history and memory in the 21st century. Her lecture in the amphitheater focused on the lessons of the Holocaust and how easy hate can grow and incubate in a community environment. Sarah, welcome to CHQ Assembly. It's so wonderful to continue our partnership with you and the museum tonight on this platform.
It's great to be with you again, Michael. I have so much admiration for your work and all of your colleagues at Chautauqua. It's such an important institution for our country, never more so than the times we're living in.
Well, thank you for that. And when you joined us in 2018, your talk reflected on the ways that our perceptions of history tend to shift over time. And tonight we'll examine a part of World War II history that most people don't know about. Why is it important for people to know about tonight's topic?
Well, first of all, because you've heard me say this before, I really believe in the power of history to encourage us to be self-reflective about human nature and human societies. And one of my favorite sayings is that the world is always going to be changing, but human nature never does. And there's parts of World War II that I think are an important backdrop for tonight's conversation, and that is the magnitude of the war that was fought on 6 continents, 30 nations, 60 million people killed, about 29,000 people a day. And it was a global event. People fled to far-flung places like China, Kenya, Uzbekistan, and tonight we're going to talk about one of them, Iran. And I think when you tell untold stories from history, like tonight's program, you can challenge people's assumptions, help people avoid simple answers to complex questions, do some critical thinking. We think about Iran today, we think about nuclear weapons, terrorism, anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism. But there was another time in history when the Iranian people were very welcoming to refugees from Nazism at a time during the war when they themselves were in need. So it's an unusual story for unusual times we live in.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that today most people, in particular in the United States, but I know certainly the world over, when they associate Iran, there's discussions about nuclear weapons, or in our nation in particular, there's discussions about terrorism or the potential role in terrorism. But for people who care about Holocaust memory, I know there's other alarming aspects of this regime, of this government. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the Islamic Republic, so-called, they have been a major perpetrator of Holocaust denial for a very long time, whether it's presidents of Iran, the Ayatollahs. They really have some of the most blatant forms of Holocaust denial. Statements like 6 million Jews murdered is just simply Zionist propaganda. It's purely fabricated to gain sympathy. And then they will very cynically use free speech to promote Holocaust denial and to justify it. One of the things I think your audience might not be aware of is that they have gone to such lengths as holding international conferences to discuss Holocaust denial. One of those conferences had people from 30 different countries, including from the United States, David Duke, who's a very noted Holocaust denier, neo-Nazi, and former leader of the Ku Klux Klan. They've also held several Holocaust denial cartoon contests, something a little hard for us to grasp. In one of those contests, they had 1,200 submissions from 60 countries. And I wanted to share some of the images with your audience if we have them. I can't see the images myself, but we have a picture of the images that they put up. They displayed the winning entries in an exhibition for the public. In these pictures, you can see typical Jewish stereotypes that go back centuries, basically with a message of Jews profiting from the Holocaust. So you see one greedy Jew sitting at a table, eating bread. They're literally eating, profiting from the Holocaust. I think one of the most really insidious ones is a cash register that we have. And if you notice the 6 million, and then of course, the famous iconic image of Auschwitz is sitting at the top of the cash register. This is a common theme of their denial, that that Jews just perpetuate this myth about the Holocaust just for financial reasons. And it's part of an overall approach to conspiracy theories that have been around for centuries, but perpetrated very much by this regime in Iran.
Been really lucky to spend some time with you inside the museum itself. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how this process of countering denial of history is different than educating about history. And the museum does both so well, and how the museum and how your work and your colleagues' work, some of which we'll look at tonight, addresses propaganda that's perpetuated specifically by what's happening in Iran today.
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. We think about it a lot. You know, with the rise of social media and the internet, truth is under assault in ways it never has been. And I often think about, when I think about the role of education, I think about a couple things. One is a big concern that we're not teaching history the way we used to. I think history does help us develop critical thinking capabilities, and we need that for a moment when we're all being fed lots of propaganda on the internet and through social media. But I also recall something I heard Ken Burns quote once, and it was from the author Richard Powers. And he said, "The best arguments in the world won't change a single mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story." And I think that's what's really important, is how do you turn history from a lot of facts and events into a good story? And that's what we try to do with our partnership with Iran Wire, and telling a lot of good stories from the past, like the ones we're going to tell tonight, to get people to think differently about their own roles and responsibilities for the future.
Well, I'm really grateful for that context. And I think it tees up nicely this evening's conversation. And I'm excited that in partnership, we can share with all of our viewers on CHQ Assembly some of the great work that the museum's doing on this. So let's turn to tonight's program, which will be divided into two parts. First, we'll look at the events that drove Jewish refugees on a perilous journey across the Soviet Union through Central Asia before finding safely in Iran, and why it's important that young Iranians understand the role that their country played in a Holocaust rescue. And then after a brief intermission, the author of Tehran Children will join Chautauqua's Director of Literary Arts, Soni Todame, to discuss the power of storytelling and specifically issues of identity and perspective. A couple of quick program notes for those joining us live. You're invited to submit questions for our audience Q&A at the conclusion of each half of this two-part program. You can participate via the CHQ Assembly questions portal at questions.chq.org. That's questions.chq.org. And while captioning isn't provided for tonight's live program, the on-demand version of this program here on CHQ Assembly, which will be available beginning tomorrow, will be captioned. So if that's a service that would be of use to you, know that that will be available in the on-demand format tomorrow. It's my great pleasure now to introduce tonight's moderator for the first conversation. Dr. Edna Friedberg is Senior Program Curator at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the host of the museum's popular Facebook Live series. Dr. Friedberg regularly speaks to audiences across the country, and her essays connecting Holocaust history with social, cultural, and political issues today have appeared in publications ranging from The Atlantic, Slate, Newsday, and The Forward. We now go to Dr. Friedberg to begin tonight's program with our thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to you and Sarah for setting the tone and the framework for our conversation. We're very grateful to our partners at Chautauqua for enabling us to bring this program that was originally intended to be in person to this virtual setting. And we would like to welcome viewers from around the country and around the world. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we can convene in ways that we could not traditionally in person. So we are grateful to have you with us tonight. Tonight, we will discuss, as Sarah and Michael said, Iran's role in offering refuge to thousands of Polish Jews during the Holocaust, and also delve into the question of why later events have made highlighting this lesser-known historical chapter even more important today. I know as a historian that I didn't learn about the history of the Tehran children until well into my career in this field. And I've wondered, why is that? Why isn't it told more? And what is it about it that has made it so difficult for people to understand and to promote? Partly, I think it provokes some cognitive dissonance in people. This is a rescue story that you will hear does not fit into a typical or familiar Holocaust trajectory of ghetto and camp and deportation. And there was also a sense among many thousands of people, Jews and Christians, who found refuge in Iran during the war, that perhaps theirs was not a legitimate survivor story because it went along this less known path. As you will hear today, the Jews who found refuge in Iran did so via the Soviet Union. And that was the place, I'd like to emphasize, where the vast majority of Polish Jews who survived the Holocaust did so either by fleeing or being deported into the Soviet Union. But it also means that this history is even more shrouded, and that both rescuers and descendants of those rescuers and those survivors are not always easy to claim it. Finally, before we turn to the panel, I do want to note that although many countries deny or distort Holocaust history in service of contemporary political agendas today, we do have a distinct case in the Iranian regime because it actively, as Sarah described, denies the Holocaust, not only as an assault on truth, but as part of its calls to annihilate the Jewish state. Again, you can submit your questions via the CHQ Assembly portal. The website for that is questions.chq.org, and we will reserve time to answer as many as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. We are joined by Dr. Michal Deckel. Dr. Deckel is an author of the critically acclaimed book, Tehran Children, A Holocaust Refugee Odyssey. And Michal is also professor of English and director of the Rifkin Center for the Humanities at the City College of New York. Michal is joined by a longtime partner of ours at the Holocaust Museum, Arash Azizi. Arash is currently a journalist with Iran Wire, and his past television work was with the BBC and also as serving as host on Manoto TV, an international Persian language channel. Arash is also, we can congratulate him, the author of a just published book within the last few weeks entitled The Shadow Commander, Soleimani, the US and Iran's Global Ambitions. Welcome, Michal. Welcome, Arash.
Thank you so much.
Michal, let's begin the conversation with you. And if we could bring up actually the cover of your book so that people can see what we're talking about. You became connected to this story we will hear through some personal history, personal family history, but also through a journey you took in writing about the Tehran children. For people in the audience who may be totally new to this subject, could you please lay out in broad brushstrokes who were the Tehran children? What is this chapter about, and how did you come to tell this story?
Right. So the Tehran children were nearly 1,000 Polish Jewish children who each with his or her own family fled from Nazi-occupied Poland to the Soviet side. This is 1939. If we can see the map, you can see it at home. They flee to the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, they are typically deported by the Soviets to labor camps, to gulags in the Soviet interior. Sometime later, they are released from those labor camps. They continue on to Central Asia, to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. From there, and that is actually where most, Edna, as you said, most Polish Jews who survived the Holocaust remained in Central Asia for the duration of the war. These children are evacuated from Soviet Central Asia, typically from Uzbekistan, without their parents, with the Polish army in exile. They're evacuated to Iran, and from there later on to India and to mandatory Palestine. So that's in very broad brushstrokes. My personal connection is my father. My father was a Tehran. In fact, in the photo that you're seeing now, these are three girls in Iran, in Tehran, on the day that they're actually leaving Tehran to start their journey to India and then to Palestine. In the middle is my aunt. And this is a very iconic photo of the Tehran children. So my aunt, my father, who was older, and another cousin, there were three of them alone, without their parents, traveled with the Tehran children and made this route. They remained in Israel. They became Israeli citizens. And that's where I was born and raised. Although I knew, as I start the book, by saying very little about this beyond the fact that they were Tehran children. And in Israel at the time when I was growing up, Tehran children meant not survivors. Apropos what you just said, Edna, so survivors, in my mind and in the mind, I think, of many, were people who were in the camps, and this story was told. It's the story of lucky children who were rescued. My book opened up everything that happened before that.
I think it is really powerful, and also a reminder to us, Michal, that it is never as simple. History is never as simple as it would be seen on the surface, and that so much is an element of luck and also an element of human choices, of people who make decisions that can have life and death consequences. I know that I was drawn to your story as well. My father actually also survived in Soviet Central Asia, but did not make his way to Iran, and who's to say why it happens to one person or another. Also, for context, that these children are not just an aberration, but they are among between 5,000 and 6,000 Polish Jews, if I'm correct, who found refuge there, as well as tens of thousands of Christian Poles who were accepted and welcomed and supported in Iran. Michal, as you detailed so beautifully in your book, Iranians welcomed these Jewish refugees, among them the between 900 and 1,000 children. Can you tell us in more specifics how they supported and helped these children to heal after such a perilous journey? And what about your father's story in a little more specifics as well?
Right. I should also note, given what you just said, that in Iran, my father and the Tehran children arrived in Iran in 1942. In Iran, beginning in 1933, with the rise of Hitler, there are also German Jewish refugees, Austrian Jewish refugees, there are Iraqi Jewish refugees who come later. So there are various groups of Jewish refugees. My father and the Tehran children arrived in August 1942. Most of them arrived. There are a few transports, but that's the main one. Iran is the first place that they arrive after 3 years of being a refugee, being starving, being deported, working in labor camps. Many of them seeing their parents died. If you look at this photo here, this is what many of the children look like. So they survived, but they were in a very, very bad state. I mean, you can see that they have eye diseases, they have typhus, they have malaria. Many children actually die when they get to Iran because they're so ill, and also adults. There was mass starvation in Central Asia at that time, and this is partly why parents chose to send their children to their fate and stay behind, even if that meant that they stayed behind. So Iran, at this point, is a country that is controlled by the Allies. In 1939, Iran was a neutral state with close ties to Germany that were there from before the war. By this point, it's controlled by the Allies, but that doesn't matter. Beyond who is controlling it, what most children and other people know is the hospitality of ordinary Iranians. Just simple gestures of people seeing these children just starting to weep, going to a candy stall, buying the contents of the candy stall and giving it to the children. things like that. One of my favorite anecdotes is there's a short memoir by a rabbi who was also evacuated, Rabbi Zev Hirschberg, and he writes about the bus ride from the port where they came to Tehran, and he's describing the driver of the bus, and he says he offers us cigarettes, he brings us food, he treats us as humans. Says this is the first time in 3 years that they're treated as human, and they are describing this again and again. It's very restorative. Now, if we can get the photo of the camp in Iran, the children's camp, the children, the Jewish children, are eventually collected in something called the children's Hebrew camp of Tehran, and this is really a couple of tents, really in a much larger Polish refugee camp. At this point, Persian Jews help them, so they bring them food, they bring them clothing. Some of them in 1942, in September 1942, in Yom Kippur, some of the children are taken to a synagogue in Tehran. And if we can see that photo of the synagogue, this is a synagogue that still exists as an active synagogue in Tehran today. It's called Haima Daniel Synagogue. A part of that synagogue was cordoned off to serve the Jewish refugees, of whoever they were. And it's that if you can see, I don't know if you can see the Torah ark, but the Torah ark says Beit HaKnesset HaYehudim HaEropim, the synagogue of the European Jews. So since they were Ashkenazi, they were given a part of the synagogue to pray in. So there were many instances like this.
It's incredible overlaps and overlays of different cultures and different influences all coming together in unexpected ways in this time and place. I'd like to bring Arash into this conversation right now. Arash, you were born in Iran, you are Iranian, lived there until you were a young adult. When did you first learn about this history? And in your experience and research, why do so few Iranians today know about their country's efforts to help thousands of Jewish refugees during the Holocaust?
Thank you, Edna, and thank you, Dr. Eka. So the story of Polish refugees in Iran is actually very well known. The fact that is often omitted or not mentioned is that many of them were Jewish and many of them ended up in mandatory Palestine, which later became Israel. And this story is, I can say, sort of covered over. Now, when I first learned about it is when I was doing research with Leo Stanfield, who was very interested in what he called the Polish Iran. And so I learned a bit about the relationship the Iranian Jews had with the Polish Jews who came to Iran throughout this period. But it was really by reading Michal's excellent book that I really was able to put all the pieces together. Previously my research focused on them during their stay in Iran, but really it's when you learn the before and you learn the after, the Soviet Central Asia, and the time that comes after it, that you really sort of understand the question and see that what a shame it is that this important story of coexistence and of hospitality of Iranians, as you mentioned, is covered over or not centered.
Arash, I know I've read that the story of the general Polish refugees kind of erasing or minimizing their Jewishness is, as you said, very well known. I've read that the Iranian city of Isfahan was even referred to as Polish Isfahan for a while. Can you give us a sense of how obscuring this history fits into the current geopolitical climate of the country?
Well, the reality is that, as was mentioned previously, Iran does speak of annihilating Israel. It does have a policy of Holocaust denial. And while Iranian Jews, I'm very proud to say, the Jewish community in Iran, unlike many Arab countries, didn't get destroyed totally. There's like between 10 to 30,000 Jews in Iran who have difficulties, but still have been able to continue their life in their own country. However, more and more anti-Semitism and different forms of Holocaust denial are used by the Iranian regime, and it's not accidental that they're used. Director Bloomfield before talked about the Holocaust cartoon contest or Holocaust review conferences hosting people like David Duke. As recent as just a few weeks ago, we saw that in Ayatollah Khamenei, the Iran supreme leader, who repeatedly denies the Holocaust, in response to the events in France, tried very cynically to use Holocaust denial and anti-Semitic language make popularity between the French Muslims or the world Muslim population. Of course, trying to use denial of Holocaust to portray himself as sort of a defender of free speech, and to try to curry favor there. So it's not accidental. They know that unfortunately, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial could be powerful ideas in their own way for hateful reasons, and that's why they use them. And the last thing I'd say on this account is that recently there was an animation film made in Iran with millions of dollars, a state-of-the-art equipment about 5th century Yemen and a Jewish kingdom there to portray it very bizarrely to the Quran and to Holocaust denial, believe it or not. So you would see that this is not an accident, and it's not just sort of a few crazy people. It's a deliberate policy that the Iranian regime has, and of course it doesn't fit well with the realities of the long presence of Iranian Jews and of the experience of the Polish Jews in Iran throughout the Second World War.
So what you're describing then, if I'm hearing you correctly, is a really distorted view of history, one that when it suits the regime focuses in an extreme and hateful way on Jews, and when it suits its purposes, minimizes or erases them from the story. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. And I just want to say, yeah, of course. And, it is true, there is an Iranian Jewish MP, for example. So they might bring the regime might claim that, oh, look, Jews are actually living sort of happily in Iran. They even have an MP in the parliament. But the reality of the community's experience is that, of course, they have to live in a regime which continually does this, which has attacked, for example, the Iranian sort of pro-regime thugs have attacked the tomb of Esther and Mordecai, a holy Jewish place in Iran, and many other examples.
I'd like to remind those of you who are watching us from home to please submit your questions via the CHQ Assembly app. The web link for that is questions.chq.org. Michal and Arash, I have a question I'd like to pose to you both. Curious about what you see as the dangers to a society when it does not know or only chooses to selectively remember its history. And in this case, how do attitudes towards Jews and other minorities feed this dangerous trend? Arash, let's begin with you.
I would say that, of course, distorting this history tries to increase sort of hateful trends in society and forgets the realities of Iran. The realities of that, for example, as I've said, Iran has always been a land in which Muslims, Jews, and Christians have often lived peacefully next to each other. Of the fact that Iran and Israel, for example, had close relations actually for a long time, and that there is not an animosity in the population towards them. The only silver lining, if you will, of this is that the Iranian regime, I think today, is so hated and unpopular that the more it denies the Holocaust and the more that it sort of promotes anti-Semitism, in fact, it creates more curiosity in people to learn about the Holocaust history and to learn about anti-Semitism. And that's why I would say, I think Iran today, if we do polling, I hope we can do free polling one day. I would say that, the anti-Semitism in Iran, I think, has decreased over the years, actually, because many people don't buy the government propaganda anymore. And there's also a very open attitude toward the state of Israel and a sort of desire to really live in peace with it in the region. That might be surprising to some opinion makers. But I think it's the reality of Iranian society that is able to see beyond the regime's propaganda, which it simply doesn't buy anymore.
Michal, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, to echo what Arash was saying, I should say that I get contacted by Iranians in Iran about the book, and people know about it. So I also think a lot of people in Iran know about the Holocaust, and I think they read on the internet and they find ways to educate themselves. Also, in terms of the history of the Tehran children specifically, I think a lot of people don't know exactly this history. I'm not sure if there's a deliberate attempt to hide this history in particular, but in terms of Jewish history, I do believe, as much as it is a cliche, I do believe that a nation that completely suppresses its own history can't move on in various ways. And I saw that in my travels in various places, especially in Russia, I would say. But I think also, and this is to go back to what Sarah was saying, Holocaust memory has become a very political issue and a very complicated issue worldwide. And it's political in different places in different ways. So in the Middle East, as Arash said, this is serving the Ayatollah's desire to cater to Islamists elsewhere. In Europe, we see in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, and where I also traveled for this book, we see that the EU, for example, is making it conditional for some countries, member countries, to commemorate and study the Holocaust. And as a response, we get a kind of backlash against that by nationalists. And I encountered all of these things when I traveled in Poland, in Russia, in Uzbekistan, and elsewhere. So I think, the history of the Jews is the history of the world. And yes, of course, education and research is part of it. But I also think conversations and really hard conversations are necessary. And I think one of the things that I did in my book is maybe practice, I like to call it radical empathy. I was in conversations with Polish nationalists, with other people across the globe. And I think I think what happens when you write a history like mine, which is kind of a global Holocaust history, you need the help of non-Jews to research. And it's really wonderful to get that help because this is a very, very difficult history. But those people also have their own history, sometimes very difficult also. They come from families that were deported and went through genocide and all kinds of other, or became themselves refugees. And I think what I try to do is to acknowledge and be in dialogue with other people's histories without falling into a competition of suffering, which is kind of what happens in many of these countries, right? They say, oh, we were victims as much as the Jews were, right? So looking for places where those histories can intersect rather than being competition as much as you can, because sometimes you can't, you can't, I think is a good way to start countering these difficult denials and distortions.
Indeed, and as you've stated so eloquently, it is the complexities of this history that makes it rich. I think it is very revealing and meaningful to a lot of people because you can see so many elements of human behavior, the kinds of motivations that lead people to help a neighbor or denounce their neighbor. Before we turn to audience questions, I would like to take just a minute to speak with Arash about some of the ways that his organization, Iran Wire, has worked with us at the Holocaust Museum for a number of years to prevent denial and distortion and to offer a counterbalance. We see it as part of our educational mission at the museum to counteract denial, not by engaging in arguments with people who don't have legitimate intellectual aims, but providing an alternative. We have extensive materials in Farsi, the national language of Iran, on our website, and also work with, for example, military personnel from around the world. Arash, could you talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've worked on together, and also thinking about the youth of Iran on whom you report and around the world? What else can be done to educate them to recognize and counter Holocaust denial and distortion of their historical record?
Yes, indeed. It's been a few days since the Sardari project was launched as a partnership between the Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Iran, where, as you mentioned, it highlights, it basically is an attempt at Holocaust education, but I'm very interested that we've been able to do it in very sort of interesting ways. One of it is introducing actually Michal's book, making sort of short videos about it, introducing this story of Iranian hospitality to Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors. There's also the examples of different Muslim communities in Bosnia and Morocco and their role as rescuers during the Holocaust. This stories that because of common sort of Islamic heritage will speak to many Iranians. We made a film at the museum about Holocaust denial. It's called Crime and Denial a few years back, with yourself in it, among others, which I think has been very well received, actually. If you look at the viewing numbers and if you look at the kind of audiences that it's got. And we also regularly highlight different forms of Holocaust denial, and show the political purposes that they're playing in Iran, and try to counter them. I believe it's a combination, and I hope that it's just a beginning, and that we can do very well under Sardari project, which at the end, I should say, the project is named after Abdul Hossein Sardari, an Iranian diplomat in Paris, who was able to also act as a rescuer for a number of Iranian and non-Iranian Jews throughout the war. One of the many diplomats, actually, who were able to do this, and whose stories I hope we will be able to tell in the years to come.
And for people who are interested in learning more about this project or about the history of the Iranian diplomat that Arash mentioned, his last name was Sardari, Sardari, and you can search for that plus Holocaust Museum, or come to our website, ushmm.org, to see that. Let's turn to some audience questions, if we could. A viewer named Lale is asking, I think this is for you, either of you, but let's start with you, Arash. When did officially sanctioned Holocaust denial begin in Iran, and how was it treated under the Pahlavis? For people less familiar with Iran, she means the Shah family.
If you're talking about the officially sanctioned Holocaust denial, there's of course been different forms of anti-Semitism Holocaust denial in Iran as in other societies. But if you're talking about officially sanctioned, it really starts under the Islamic Republic, many of whose founders had been sort of virulently anti-Zionist, of course, and they try to link this sometimes into different forms of Holocaust denial. I should say that the Iranian revolutionaries who found the regime in 1979 had different pedigrees, and sometimes surprising pedigrees of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. For example, sometimes it was actually a unfortunate number of Soviet pamphlets, the sort of Soviet anti-Semitic pamphlets, which there was a short sort of period in the Soviet Union, and there was officially sanctioned anti-Semitic pamphlets that were translated to different languages. Some of it was through them that had come. But anyways, because it existed among the revolutionaries who founded the Iranian regime in 1979, at different periods it has been championed by the people who found the regime. But under the current supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who came to power in 1989, it's been used more regularly. And under the President Ahmadinejad, it was quite a bit. But Khamenei has shown, as I said, as recent as a few weeks ago, that it's not an aberration, but the official policy of the Iranian regime, unfortunately.
So it is always, of course, critically important to understand the context in which it's said. What is that particular moment happening in the news? What is the mood? What are the goals of the speaker?
That's right.
Michal, we have a couple of audience questions for you that I'm going to connect. Someone would like to know, how did the Tehran children escape from work camps in Siberia and then later in Central Asia? And also, did any of these children remain in Iran rather than go on to British Mandate Palestine and Israel?
Yeah, that's a great question. The last part of it, especially. Yes, first of all, in terms of escaping the camps, I mean, most of them did not escape, but rather they were released from the camps this is such a complicated history, and it's impossible to tell it in a talk like this one. But basically, after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, through any number of negotiations, Polish citizens, including Polish Jews, were released from the labor camps and the gulags, with the idea that they will fight alongside the Soviets against the Nazis. So they were released, and going to Central Asia was in some ways a second deportation. It wasn't an organized deportation, but this was the Soviet Union. They were told you have to go to this and this kolkhoz, special settlement in Samarkand or somewhere else. And that's where they ended up. Some Tehran children, a few Tehran children did stay in Iran. A few, not necessarily what we call the Tehran children, but Polish Jewish refugees, especially women who married Persian men. And they remained there, some of them until 79, some of them even beyond that.
Great. I'd like to thank viewer Mark, who is watching from Palo Alto, California, who sent in that question, wondering about the later fate. Arash, I was struck you had talked about kind of the basic psychology that as much as the Iranian regime tries to suppress or deny Holocaust history, it just triggers more interest. You know, even a child knows that if something is forbidden, you must immediately become more interested and attracted to it. And we are glad that we can provide resources for them. A viewer is asking, how does Iran's Holocaust denial fit in with the country's goals, its larger political and social objectives? As you mentioned, it seems this policy is working against itself. How would you respond to that?
Very briefly, I would say, to add on to what Michal was saying, that Helena Stelmach, actually, who was one of the best known sort of Polish refugees and was a public face of them. And I only found out like a couple of years ago when doing research that she was actually Jewish. She was always known as sort of the Polish refugee, but I found out that she was actually Jewish. Although I don't know sort of about how much she kept to her faith or identity after all these years, but she certainly had been one of the Jewish refugees who passed through Iran. As for the Holocaust denial, it's an excellent question. I would say that one of the very uncomfortable ideas that we need to talk about is that Holocaust denial might sound sort of ridiculous to an educated public, one would hope. But unfortunately, I do believe that it can be a powerful idea of hate that does help organize people. I think it's an uncomfortable idea for some people sometimes, that we would think that it's only sort of buffoons who believe in it. But unfortunately, it can be a powerful idea. So it's not super useful inside Iran necessarily, because people, as I said, hate the regime. But as the regime tries to gain popularity within its core base, which is a small part of Iranian society, but also across the world, particularly in Muslim communities, that it tries to incense and it tries to sort of abuse their grievances by tying them to its vision, right? It's a vision. Holocaust denial is part of it. It's a vision of Islamism, that it's very anti-Israel. I mean, it's anti-Zionist, but not just anti-Zionist. It's really anti-Israel, murderously anti-Israel. And the Holocaust denial works with it. And unfortunately, I've witnessed this throughout my life in different countries. Say in South Africa, you'll see that there are there's official Iranian attempts, for example, to put forward a vision, and Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism are universal ideas, effectively, right? They're a universal language that you can use in other places to play on the local anti-Semitism that exists and help curry favored with the brand of Iranian regime's Islamism. But yeah, I think this reality that it can be a useful idea for these evil purposes is important, and we shouldn't ignore it. Which is why Holocaust denial matters, and we're talking about it after all. That's why we don't just ignore it and we talk about it.
Yeah, but I wanted to just add to what Arash was saying, that so we have to keep in mind, though, again, sort of some official propaganda and uses of some groups, but the reality is always more complex. It was then, so it was for example, I was saying that there were German Jewish refugees in Iran. At the same time that there are German Jewish refugees, there are also pro-Nazi clerics. There is Gestapo presence within Iran, but then also the Shah is letting in, and the Prime Minister is letting in these Jewish refugees, and it's all existing simultaneously in one country, in one city. So this is a complex country, and complex. Luckily, it's a complex world, for better or for worse.
And I hope that we are introducing some cognitive dissonance this evening into people's understanding of and perception of Iran, that it is not, quote unquote, an evil empire, but it is a country with good and bad people like any place, and with a whole range of opinions, knowledge, and approaches. We have time for one final question. Michal, a member of the audience would like to know if you've managed to track down or be in touch with any rescuers, people who helped Tehran children, or any of their descendants.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, when we talk about rescuers, there are different rescuers, right? So because we have Jewish, the Joint Distribution Committee in America, the Jewish Agency for Palestine in Jerusalem, You have some rescuers in Iran. You have ordinary people in all of these places. So you have people in Britain. This, in many ways, this is a story of an international rescue and aid project. So yes, I definitely met people in Israel who were involved in this. I even met the son of the Iranian government official who was in charge of the day-to-day life of the refugees, like their laundry and their other services that they were getting. I met him. He still lives in Iran, but I met him in New York, and we went to a jazz club together. Had a great night. So it's been really nice to connect to these people for sure.
I think this goes back, and it's a nice way for us to close to where we started, that in order for history to really speak to someone, you need to engage them with a story. And before history becomes history, it is just someone's life experience. And when you break it down to that very, very human, individual level, it is so much more relatable, and therefore something we can really internalize and reflect on. I'd like to thank both of you for this first half of the conversation. Audience, please don't leave. We will be continuing. But Arash Azizi, thank you so much for being with us today and for your continued partnership and scholarship on this subject. Thank you, Arash.
Thank you very much, Edna. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dekel. Thank you.
Thank you, Arash. Great talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Michal, please stay there. We will be continuing the conversation with you, but I do also want to note that a number of viewers are sharing in the comments that their parents or relatives were also part of this group among the Tehran children. Some of them have been offering photos. Not all of you left your contact information, so we ask that you please do email us. We have an email address, curators@ushmm.org, curators@ushmm.org. If you have photos or other materials related to the Tehran children, we would love to be in touch with you.
Yeah, and I should also say, get in touch. You can get in touch with me, through my website, Twitter, Facebook, because I am very, very, in a way, there's a kind of sequel to this book by material that I'm getting from people who are reading it. So this is a work in progress, and I would love to hear from you as well. And of course, send your materials to the museum.
Very happy if we can help to spark more conversation and more community among people with this shared history. Before we move into the second part of the conversation, I'd just like to thank you again for reminding us about the truth is stranger than fiction part of history and the ways that the utility of certain narratives is used and exploited now, but that does not erase our responsibility or opportunity to remember it in all of its authenticity. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, and great question, Edna.
Let's, as an interlude, take a look at a short video from the Sardari project that Arash mentioned, from their film Tehran Children, that captures Michal's personal story. We hope you enjoy this video and the rest of tonight's program, where she will be in conversation with Soni more specifically about her family odyssey and the writing of memoir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Researching Iranian history is more than an academic exercise for Michal Dekel. Her father, Hanan Teitel, was one of the child refugees in Iran.
My father was born in a town called Ostrov Mazoviechka, very close to the Soviet border. It's a town of about 25,000 people. At the time, in 1939, about a third of them were Jewish. My father's family was a wealthy, established family in their town in Poland. They had been there for 8 generations. They owned a large brewery.
Jews had been living in Poland for more than 1,000 years. Nazi Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. It was the start of the Second World War. The Nazis targeted individuals and groups that they deemed unfit and undesirable.
Some people were able to flee, like my father's family, to the Soviet side. To leave was a hard decision. to leave everything that you had and basically to become a kind of refugee and wanderer in the world.
Hanan Titel's family and many other Polish Jews escaped to the Soviet Union. They were arrested by the police and were deported to a Siberian labor camp, or Gulag, in Arkhangelsk, one of the most northern cities in Russia. Many Polish refugees chose to move to the Soviet Republic of Uzbekistan, 2,800 miles southeast. The war with Germany caused destruction, famine, and hunger across the Soviet Union, especially in Uzbekistan, which was one of the poorest and least developed parts of the country.
When did your father tell you about that story first time, about separating from his parents?
Never. He never told me the story. I only understood this moment, the gravity of this moment when I was writing the book. And my father, unfortunately, died in 1993. So I couldn't get information from him, but I interviewed my aunt at length.
Why do you think your father never told you about this?
My father never told me about this, I think, for several reasons. First of all, his personality. I mean, he was a very kind of closed off, reticent man. Secondly, culturally, again, in Israel, Tehran children were not considered survivors, and this was not a story that was told. It was only told as a kind of rescue story of Jewish children who were brought from Iran to Palestine. What happened before then was not particularly emphasized.
It is my pleasure to be in conversation tonight with Dr. Michael Deckel, discussing the power of storytelling. Her memoir, Tehran Children, a Holocaust Refugee Odyssey, was a finalist for this year's Chautauqua Prize. The Chautauqua Prize is the Chautauqua Institution's literary arts annual and national prize that celebrates a book of fiction or nonfiction literary narrative that provides a richly rewarding reading experience and honors the author for significant contribution to the literary arts. Submission for next year's prize is open, and we are closing it on Tuesday, December 15th. As a finalist for the Chautauqua Prize, Tehran Children exemplifies the power that individuals have by learning about the history and telling their stories. Dr. Deckel knew very little about her father's experience as a Tehran child until after he died. And in writing her book and through subsequent research, she is exploring how history and current events shape her identity and perspective. Dr. Deckel is the author of two other books, The Universal Jew, Masculinity, Modernity, and the Zionist Moment, and Oedipus and Kishinev. She is a professor of English at the City College of New York and the CUNY Graduate Center. Before I welcome Dr. Deckel, however, a quick reminder. We encourage you, the audience, to ask questions and let us know where you're joining us from for the Q&A with Dr. Deckel just after my conversation with her. You can submit your question through the submission portal at questions.chu.org. Again, that's questions.chu.org. We will reserve time at the end of the conversation to get to as many questions as possible. Now, help me in welcoming back Dr. Michael Deckel.
Thank you so much, Sony. It's an honor.
It's so good. It's so good to have you here. And I'm so excited for this conversation. And I want to say thank you very much for this beautiful memoir. I want to start by asking about what I think is la raison d'être of your book, if you do not mind. On page 47, you write how Oslo, the city in which your father grew up in Poland, had written a new history for itself, one that excludes that of your family. And I wanted to ask, can you explain to us the significance of this omission and why it is important for you personally to reclaim it?
Right. Yeah. I'm glad that now I know the raison d'etre of my book. And I think you have a point. As you know, because you read the book, I began this journey knowing very little. I mean, I grew up in Israel. To me, my father was an Israeli, and also I was an English professor. I was just, reading Wordsworth and being very happy about that. I didn't really think about engaging in any kind of genealogical historical research until a decade ago. So when you go, so you only know your identity from kind of where you are in the present and where your parents are. And then once you start researching, and I started, and the more I researched, the more I knew. So it started with Iran, but then it went to these other places that my father was in, and finally to his pre-war life in Poland, whereas I knew nothing about it. Poland to me was a mythical place. It could have been Mars. And I discovered that my father's family lived there for 8 generations. And what you're seeing now here is their brewery. They had a brewery for several generations and very embedded in this town. So when you're researching, your first response is tremendous happiness because you discovered this past. Then you are thinking, but what do I do with this past? This brewery doesn't exist anymore. In its place is a school, a Polish school. So at the entrance to the school, there is a plaque that commemorates the martyrdom of Poles who fought the Nazis. Because the brewery, as I found out, the brewery became Gestapo headquarters during the war. And it was a place where many people were tortured and died, and a terrible place. So then I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to have to reinsert my family. Somebody's going to have to put a plaque here that says, well, this was the title family brewery. But it's beyond that, because it's also, when I research some more, I know that, for example, many Jews were killed in that Brovar, by the Gestapo. So how do I also bring them? How do I make a plaque for them there, right? So again, we go back to the question of contested memories and competition memories and so on. These are hard questions. In many ways, I see my book as that plaque, my book as that memorial for them.
Thank you. And this is really a well-crafted book and very, very convincing, very well written. And I want to talk a little bit about the craft of it, the choices a writer makes when writing a memoir. You write in page 117, and I hope you will be able to read the passage first, that the assumption attached to writing a memoir, you argue that historical research allowed you to write responsibly and more emphatically about your father. Can you talk more about this and why it is important for memoirists?
Yeah, maybe I'll read this passage and then I'll explain what I meant. Numerous children of Nazi victims have written memoirs, but most of them do not focus on historical detail, in part because the historical contours of the transports and concentration camps are by now generally known, in part because they focus on the second generation, their parents' silences and post-war neurosis, the children's dread of their parents' past, and their inability to know those pasts. More recent Holocaust memoirs have tended to be less psychologically conflicted and more evidence-based, but they're still grounded narrowly in testimonies or in few relevant details, as if searching for a plethora of knowledge about the Holocaust would overwhelm both writer and reader. A line divided historians from psychologists and memoirists, an underlying assumption that intense historical focus in a memoir would make it less personal, obscure the survivor, and cause a failure of empathy. I too had begun in this way, treating historical research as an exigency and a means to an end. I would conduct just enough research to allow me to write my father's memoir responsibly, but increasingly, the knowledge of the historical detail was making me listen more shrewdly, but also more empathically. The more I knew, the more I read, interrogated, and compared accounts and testimonies, the broader, deeper, and more precise my understanding became. The more I heard the voice of my father and others. I read accounts of others to piece together the puzzle of my father, and gradually his past and theirs, which had been dead, began speaking to me. So yes, in my talks, I like to say that I give a historical answer to a psychological question: who was my father? And my father was in many ways very enigmatic. And I think that the historical research is necessary for various ways, in various ways, also because of what we just heard, because we're living in such an age of post-truth and versions of truth, it's very necessary to get as close as you can to what happened. At the same time, I think it also, just knowing the details of exactly what my father went through, from what he wore to exactly the days that he separated from his parents and the place where he separated. So I don't know if you have the photos here. This is my father, by the way, on the day he arrived in Athlete in Palestine, but also I recreated various scenes in the journey. I found the exact place, for example, in a Samarkand where my father separated from his parents, and I think this was a very formative moment in his life, and therefore in my life as his daughter. That's my father and toddler me, and so I think that the big historical details allowed for an intimate memoir. And so the memoir tried to do both, be intimate and scholarly and big at the same time, and seems to work okay.
Yeah, thank you. And talking about your father, I want to talk a little bit more about it, because through reading your memoir, and I come to understand identity in a completely different way. And you wrote about your father's identity as a matter of chance and circumstance, and how this identity really is, in my opinion, is very different than the conventional idea that we have agency over our identity. And I want to ask, why do you think it was the case for father? And overall, how has your interpretation of identity evolved over time? Or have you always thought of identity this way?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I think we tend to think today of identity in two ways, especially in academia, right? I mean, either it's this essentialist thing where, it's always the same, it's never changing, kind of what we inherited, that's it. Or it's constructed, right? So this artificial thing that we almost learned from various ideologies and so on. And I think the definition that I offer is not this or that. And again, I think the book is not ideological. The book is simply my journey and the insights that I'm gaining as I'm learning things. But one of the things that happened to me is this. I mean, to me, my father was an Israeli man. And I was an Israeli, but then I started researching and I start traveling, and I travel, for example, to Uzbekistan, and I realized that what I thought was a place of transit for my father was actually an end point for many, many people. At each one of these points, Iran, Uzbekistan, Russia, was actually an end point. People were released from special settlements, from labor settlements, and some of them just didn't continue because they said, where are we going to go? It's a war. Maybe we'll go to the next town and we'll stay there until the war is over. Then the war ended. They got caught behind an iron curtain and became Russian. So I was saying like these versions of myself as the Russian Michal or the Uzbek Michal or possibly even the Persian Michal. At the same time, place is fate, place is identity, place is destiny. So that doesn't make you, the fact that the identity is arbitrary doesn't make it less authentic or real or strong. I mean, among the Tehran children, of these almost 1,000 children, there were children from all sectors of Jewish society in Poland, all classes. Some of them were from Zionist families, some of them were not at all from Zionist families. And yet they became Israelis. Quite a few of them died in Israeli wars. There's a very famous Israeli general, Janusz Korczak, a war hero who was a Tehran child. So they became Israeli, and that doesn't make their identity not authentic, but I think there is an arbitrary quality to this, given the fate of refugees and the different routes of migrations that were possible at the time, and then maybe even today in the stories of refugees.
Thank you. I want to remind our audience that you can submit your questions and where you're joining us from to a submission portal at questions.chu.org. Again, submit your question and where you're joining us from at questions.chu.org. I want to ask something because, like Edna, this is an important part of history that I only discovered after reading your book. And I'm guessing this is similar for a lot of our audience here. And I want to thank you for writing it. I learned a lot about it and very important information. What have been the responses from your readers? Can you discuss the power of storytelling from your experience of writing Tehran Children?
Yeah, I mean, the response has been incredible. I mean, as I said, in some ways, I set out to write the memoir of one person, and I ended up writing the memoir of 250,000 people, because the book is really not just the history of my father and these 1,000 Jewish children. It's really about all these Polish Jews who ended up in the East, whether in Central Asia or in Iran or in Palestine or in India and other places. And this is the history of most Polish Jewish survivors. So it's a history of most Polish Jewish survivors that has not really been told as a story. I mean, there are these various memoirs, but it hasn't been told as a story. So people write me, and I mean, many people write me, also Iranians and even Uzbeks, but I'm especially moved by descendants of people who are heirs of the story. And people will write me and will say, my father was in Uzbekistan. I'm shocked. I thought he was the only one. Now, I just told you that there were 250,000 Polish Jews in Central Asia, and the person thought that their parent was the only one. So in part, this is because people didn't talk. I mean, that's a different conversation, why they didn't talk. But also, it's because the story was not available. It was not available to me either until I started researching him. In other words, if I discovered today that my father, God forbid, was in Auschwitz, I would know what Auschwitz meant because I had already read Primo Levi, I read Elie Wiesel, I read Art Spiegelman. But if I discovered my father was in Uzbekistan, what was he doing there? How did he get there? From Poland or in Iran? So I think what my book did is connect the dots for a lot of people. And some of these responses are even from very educated people, professors and so on. They just didn't really, they said, oh, we were looking for our grandparents' deportation cards. We didn't realize that they would be in Cyrillic because, they were in Russian. And so my book has been able to provide a kind of framework for other people to understand the story. And this is to go back to what Sarah said. I think it's been such an honor to be able to tell a story like that gives people their own story back.
Thank you. This is beautiful. You talk about the way that you understand your father's identity. And now that you have done all that research and you have written this wonderful book, and you know your father in a different light now, I want to ask, how has that changed the way you understand your relationship with your father when he was alive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I begin the book by talking about my father's, some intimate details from our family life. And one of those intimate details was that my father was very, very, very close to his mother who lived with us. So his parents remained in Central Asia and Uzbekistan. His father eventually died. He didn't make it. To be reunited with his children. And my grandmother ended up coming to Israel in 1949 and really lived with us her entire life. And my father was very close to her. And I mean, this is just a small piece of the puzzle, but it's an example of to answer your question. as a child, I resented that. I mean, I thought, why is he closer to why is he so close to his mother? Is he closer to his mother more than to us children? And once I understood, for example, the separation that they went through, and I want to stress that it's not just a separation. I mean, they're sending their children away, but they themselves are staying in the war. So there's a feeling like, they might not survive, and there's a lot of guilt on the children's end and so on. So I learned, in a way, I was able to piece the pieces of my father's puzzle to an extent, and it's just only tragic that I can't really talk to him about it because, as you know, he died quite a few years ago. I learned even stuff about why he died, and I think that is related to his journey and some stuff that he contracted when he was on the journey. But I think beyond that, this book has been important to me in some ways to reconnect to the world. I mean, my father's response to what he went through, it was in many ways to kind of be not a recluse, but in some ways to be cut himself off a little bit from the world to some extent. And I think my book is a kind of getting back into the world and reinserting myself in the world in various ways, in his name in some way, including his Polish past, but this whole connecting to other parts of this journey. And so, at least in spirit, I feel closer to him, and also some ways closer to my Jewish identity and closer to the world at large, if you will.
Thank you. Thank you very much, this answer. And before we open the conversation to the audience, I want to congratulate you, Dr. Dekal, on your wonderful memoir and for being the finalist for the Chautauqua Prize. Tehran Children proves why it is important to tell the whole story, because we rely on these stories and they can affect our identity. And because the more we know about our history, the better we understand ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And now we're going to take some questions. We have quite a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm hoping that we will get to them. But related to my last question here, someone asked, and I'm going to read the question verbatim, so I will not misconstrue anyone's question. Do you know if any of the Tehran children connected with their families at the end of the war? And this is coming from Linda from Vermont.
So yes, as I said, my father connected with his mother at the end in 49. So this is in 49. I mean, we have to remember that for the people who remained, who were refugees in Central Asia, the typical route was that they returned to Poland and then they ended up in displaced persons camps in Europe. And so for them, 45 was the midpoint. I mean, they remained refugees for years and years and years. It's not that they had a place to go back to. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 48, my grandmother came and many other parents who survived came. At the same time, many died as well. I mean, my grandfather died of tuberculosis and did not make it. Other members of my family, something like 25% of the people in labor camps died of starvation and of disease. I mean, conditions were incredibly hard and people died afterwards as well. But yes, people who were separated and survived did eventually connect in various ways and in various places, for sure. Yes, and then they also remained in touch. So for example, my father was writing letters to Uzbekistan. I mean, not often. There was no internet, but certainly once in a while he knew what was going on with them. And he was trying to get help. He was trying to get packages to them, and so on. So yes.
Thank you. And also thank you, Linda, for your question. Next question we have, has your book reached an Iranian audience?
Yes. I mean, it has reached an Iranian audience. I've actually given talks in quite a few Iranian studies programs at Stanford and San Francisco State and elsewhere, and I have certainly here in the United States, but I also hear occasionally from Iranians in Iran and other people. So I think it's making its way slowly to all kinds of corners of the world.
That's true. Thank you. The question we have here, and I think that might be a common question we receive, is have you received anti-Semitic reaction to your research either while you were researching in Poland or after? This is from someone joining us from West Palm Beach, Florida.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have not while I was researching, but after, when the book came out, the book was reviewed in the New York Times, and the reviewer emphasized this idea of competition of memory and so on with Poland. And that morning, I woke up at 8 a.m. to a barrage of hate mail on Twitter. So yes, I have received some, not every day, and I would say that has not been the dominant sentiment, but certainly that has happened. I've also at the same time received emails and messages from Poles who said my book has helped them research too, and people ask me questions and I send them information, people that I use and so on, because this was the fate of, and part of this anyway was the fate of Polish Christian refugees as well. So, it's worked both ways.
Thank you. This question we have from Maria and watching from Winter Garden, Florida. And yes, Dr. Dekel, how do you keep your personal feelings about the Holocaust silent when you're talking to a Holocaust denier?
I have to say, I haven't talked to a Holocaust denier on my route. I mean, I've never talked to somebody who said, no, it didn't happen, and I don't think I could do that. But I certainly talk to people who, emphasize their own suffering, and kind of try to create a kind of equivalency, right, between the Holocaust and other forms of suffering. It is challenging, but I think it's also important to recognize other. A lot of times people are, yes, there are people who are like just haters and anti-Semites, but there are people also who also do have their own history of suffering, and they want to be heard, and they deserve to be heard, and they deserve to be acknowledged in a way that, and you have to try to hear them in a way that respects their suffering and doesn't trample your own history. It's a very delicate and complicated and hard thing to do, but I think it's the only way to move forward, because otherwise we're each speaking to our own camp, and it's a kind of an echo chamber, and we can't make any progress. So and I think there is a lot of suffering in the world of various forms, and so I think that's what I try to do on my journey. I describe in the book various difficult conversations and various difficult moments with a lot of my interlocutors, and it did happen. But I'm also proud that through somehow we continued talking afterwards.
Thank you, and I'm sure we will continue this discussion. We will have it, and I want to say thank you to everyone in the audience who has questions and everyone who joined us. Before we leave, I want to encourage you all to join our friends at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for the next Facebook Live event on December 16 at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, titled Rescue Recipes, Heroic Actions That Save Family Treasures. The museum will introduce you to a Holocaust survivor, an award-winning chef, and a precious family recipe book. which was rescued from neighbors ready to loot the homes of Jews being deported from a small village in Yugoslavia. From 1944 to today, learn about one survivor's childhood memories and the family cook who protected these treasured fragments of his life before the Holocaust. I encourage you to learn more about the topics highlighted in our discussion tonight by visiting the Sardari Project at sardariproject.com, a collection of videos and articles developed by the museum in cooperation with Iran Wire to help young Iranians learn about Holocaust history. And lastly, please join us next week on Tuesday, December 15 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on this platform as we welcome Dr. Joshua Bennett back to Chautauqua for our Chautauqua Authors Convening Series. If you happen to not know who Dr. Bennett is, I encourage you to watch his videos on YouTube and read his books, especially his new collection of poems, Ode, from which he will read on Tuesday. You can buy Ode from our bookstore at chautauquabookstore.com. Thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. Thank you to our panelists, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Chautauqua Institution, and especially Dr. Michael Deckel for beautiful book and awards tonight. Now, I want to invite Chautauqua Institution's President Michael Hill and United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Director Sarah Bloomfield back for their closing remark.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, and I would be happy to hear from readers.
Yes, thank you. Now,
thank you, Sony, and really thanks to all of our contributors for tonight's program. I know that we started the program commenting that many of us were unaware or not as aware as we should be about this particular narrative, and I'm so grateful to all of the contributors for unpacking this important story for us, and I hope that it encourages you to learn more. I hope that you will pick up Tehran Children or other pieces of information that were shared tonight. Sarah, I just want to, in the few minutes left, just get a little bit about your thoughts. I was so struck about this notion about the sharing of narratives, creating communities, and that poignant comment that telling a story gives a story back. Your thoughts and reflections from the panels tonight, and why this story is so important right now.
Well, I want to go back to something I think that Edna referred to in the beginning, and I talked a lot about history, and there's that expression, history is just one damn thing after another. Well, it's actually a lot more than that, and tonight's program, I think, showed how it's really about individuals. We tend to think of history with the individuals who have power, political, financial power, and have influence. But history is really about the people who are affected by that power and how do they respond. And this is really a story of remarkable resilience and determination. And also the way that there was the story in history, and then there was the history of the story in Michal's own sense of her own identity and her perceptions of her own identity and her feeling a part of a community in the present or in the past. And I think actually, if we think about our own lives and our own family stories, we too are a great part of this big thing we call history.
And isn't it remarkable? I was so struck by, there's the quote of history is written by the victors. And yet we see in these stories that are emerging now, the ability of an individual to reclaim history, to reshape history, to give voice to other people. I was struck by I thought my father was the only one. By telling the story, how it in so many ways gave power and agency to others. I've been so struck by that reclamation and the restoration of history in this process.
One of the interesting trends in Holocaust history that it was originally in the decades after the war about the Nazis and about what they did. It was very Berlin focused and what Berlin wanted to have happened, and then what happened as if in a way in the passive tense. And then in recent decades, there's been more research on these individual stories so that you can see history from the bottom up and give more agency to people that we've always called victims. And the victims did remarkable things. We think they had no choices. And of course, they had what we call choiceless choices. They were terrible, but it's still, there's incredibly inspiring stories how within those terrible moral dilemmas, the victims did exercise some agency to maintain their individuality and dignity.
So I know that in this COVID era, it's almost unthinkable to travel, but I also know that we will soon be able to do that again. So for those that have not been to the museum or haven't been recently, what are the new things coming up? What should people expect if they venture into Washington to visit you all when it is safe to do so?
Hand sanitizer. We have 21 stations throughout the museum. We just reopened briefly. Unfortunately, we had to close again, but we do know how to operate the museum during COVID. So I hope that we will reopen in the not too distant future. But we have our permanent exhibition, of course, which is the story of the Holocaust in its largest scope, the totality of it. And then we have a very timely special exhibition that we opened a few years ago, looking at America's response to the Holocaust. And I think one of the shocking things people discover is that the persecution and then eventually the murder of the Jews was reported in the American media while it was happening. Americans did have access to this information. And we posed the question about what did America know and how did America respond? And we look at not only our government, but we look at ourselves as ordinary people and what were our own choices. And it promotes a lot of critical thinking. Let me just leave it at that.
Well, we have shared some resources that are available to our viewers here on CHQ Assembly that they might further explore. I know you also have an expansive website, but at a time when we can't gather in person, and I know we've all been chatting about that even before our program, I'm used to seeing Sarah and her team in person once or twice a year, and it's been far too long. I know that this partnership has allowed for, I hope, a different kind of a shared lived experience together. I'm grateful to our Friends for Joining Us community. I'm grateful to all the folks that are watching this program live and the many others that we know will watch it on demand. On behalf of all of us at Chautauqua, our sincere thanks to our friends and our partners and the remarkable team at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. I am heartened and believe deeply that this will not be the last time you see this institution partner with that incredible institution. So I want to thank them. I want to thank again all of our panelists and everyone who put so much into tonight's program. As we learned, telling individual stories and narratives can reclaim power. So I hope that this also encourages all of our viewers to look into their own narratives and to share those stories with us and with others. So thank you to our viewers for joining this evening. We hope to see you again here on CHQ Assembly soon. Be well and be safe.
A living memorial to the Holocaust, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum inspires citizens and leaders worldwide to confront hatred, prevent genocide, and promote human dignity. Visit ushmm.org for more information.
CHQ Assembly is made possible through the collaboration and innovation of Chautauqua Institution's full-time and part-time staff, seasonal staff, and many volunteers, as well as participants like you, whose engagement, gifts, and subscriptions sustain our mission.